Greetings. We're here to talk about Native American and First Nation figures in sculpture, particularly those in the United States Capitol. We try to, every time as we're coming upon Thanksgiving, address issues that look at the experiences of Native American people and how those Native American experiences are presented in the Capitol. So today we have joining us for this webinar an author and historian, Fred Poyner IV, as he discusses his book, Native American and First Nation Figures in Sculpture, including those displayed in the Capitol. This book examines how the placement of Native American sculptures factors into the identities of their subjects. Several were produced in multiple editions for other locations in addition to Washington, D.C. Some statues that are part of the National Statuary Hall collection include Chief Standing Bear, Sarah Winnemucca, Will Rogers, Pope, Sacajawea, Sequoia, and Chief Washakai. Together, we will discover where these statues came from, why they've been set to represent their states in the Capitol, and the artists who sculpted these figures. Offering a thorough examination of artworks through 50 different sculptors in the book. We're not going to get to go through the whole book, but we're going to give you a taste and encourage you to go get the book yourself to read the rest of the story. But Mr. Poyner's book profiles how artists have incorporated either traditional Native styles and techniques or European artistic styles, and trying to create those figurative subjects in wood, in stone, in marble, in bronze, and other materials, and to what degree or not they utilized indigenous figures or models, photographs of individuals, or other primary sources to create their sculptures. And so we can understand how each sculpture relates to the landscape and display location, and how each sculptor's own life relates to the works that they have created for public viewing. So take a moment to think about the life of our author. Fred F. Poyner IV is an independent historian and an author who enjoys researching and writing about the art and history of the Pacific Northwest, including public sculpture. His first book, The First Sculptor of Seattle, The Life and Art of James A. Wen, was published in 2014 and funded through the forculture.org heritage projects, and has received multiple awards. Mr. Poyner holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in art history from Western Washington University, a Master's of Arts degree in Museology and Art from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. In 2019, he received the Peace and Friendship Award from the Washington State Historical Society for the Interwoven Oral History Project to preserve the stories of individuals with Nordic and Indigenous heritage. He's the author of 3 other published books about public sculpture in the Pacific Northwest, lives in Issaquah, you'll have to make sure I pronounce that right, I probably missed it, Washington, with his family. And we are honored that he has joined us today, and he has given me the permission to call him Fred today. So, Mr. Poyner, turn back on your camera and let's listen to your story. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you, Jane. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here today with the U.S. Capitol Historical Association and to offer insights into my latest publication, First Nation, Native American and First Nation Figures in Sculpture, North American Monuments, Memorials, and Statuary of 50 Artists. I would like to begin the session by acknowledging that the month of November is National Native American Heritage Month. And in the spirit of that, I welcome the opportunity here to share some insights and findings and what I've come to understand about public sculpture that focuses on Indigenous figures throughout not only the United States, but also Canada, encompassing North America. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that I can include some visuals to share with the audience. And yeah, can everybody see that? Oh, good. I began working on this book about 4 years ago. As it happened, it was coincided with the global pandemic that affected all of us. I had just finished up the publication on another book about Northwest sculpture titled Portland Public Sculptors. And that was an anthology that looked at 10 different sculptors of the 20th century, including Alice Cooper, who did one of the first female sculptors to do a public monument for the West Coast in 1905 with her Sacajawea statue. And this was one of two works at that time, coinciding with the Lewis and Clark Centennial that was held in Portland. And this has been kind of a continuation for me, because in wrapping up the research for that book, I wanted to expand upon the idea of, how are Native Americans and First Nation figures represented in artwork? Are there differences between Native and non-Native trained artists? What are the different kinds of materials that are used and employed? Whether they're traditional red cedar, yellow cedar carvings of welcome figures, story poles, spindle wheels, or are they more traditional European materials and methods and styles that involve bronze casting and the lost wax method, or direct figure carving out of marble? So for me, it was really a daunting challenge. And one of the biggest challenges was, okay, so how do I narrow the focus of this in a way that can be meaningful, yet still comprehensive, and do the subject credit? And to that end, I settled on some really key criteria. The sculpture had to be of a figurative work. In most cases, it was three-dimensional. And I wanted to make sure that it included both, that it was broad in terms of its time coverage and scope. So really, the book looks at the past 200 years, everything from a wooden figurehead on a Navy warship to a contemporary carving by a Yakama artist as part of his storytelling traditions. This was this kind of dovetailed with my research in terms of going to archives, visiting sites, and also talking with artists and sculptors themselves about their processes, how they designed, how they modeled their works, both the technical aspects and also the collaborative ones, and to include their voices as part of this narrative. I was really fortunate to be able to, in many cases, meet with several of these sculptors in person, or to speak with them on the phone about their work. And I can honestly say that there's not a book like this anywhere today that examines both historical and contemporary sculptors in this capacity. So I'm really pleased with the result, and I hope audiences are too. As I said, almost half of the sculptors that are included are still living today. Several are not practicing sculpture anymore, but their work is very broad in terms of their backgrounds, their subjects, where they are located across the United States or in Canada. And another important aspect of this was I wanted to look at how the public sculptures of each one, how that fit into the history of its place where it was found. Were there ties to Native American or First Nation communities? Were the figures themselves somehow tied to the area? And some of the results were really surprising, and deal with subjects like Native displacement, uh, uh, even on topics that are uncomfortable, like genocidal approaches to Native Americans, and how they were removed from areas. So as I said, it was a real challenge, but I like how it turned out in the diverse scope of those that are discussed and talked about and interviewed. 6 of the sculptors of the 50 are Native American or First Nation heritage. 7 of the sculptors are women, including a couple that are contemporary with works like Georgia Boone in Oregon and her statue of Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce in Joseph, Oregon. Or in many cases, these sculptors have come from outside the United States or Canada. Vala Ola from Iceland is a good example, who came here to the United States after being trained in Iceland, and has done several public monuments that are part of her portfolio, spread across from Florida to Colorado to Arizona. One of the findings that was really surprising was that of the 50, there were at least 3, including one contemporary sculptor, who were bestowed with an honorary member status of a particular tribe. And that is a distinction that kind of reflects the degree to which the majority of these sculptors and artists either knew their subjects firsthand, or they did such a level of engagement and research that it was an honest really achievement for them in terms of of their depiction and the physicality, the portraiture, and the character of their subject. And to bring us full circle, 7 of the sculptors from the list of 50 that I did include do have pieces of statuary and sculpture in the National Statuary Hall collection. So without further ado, I'll keep jumping right in here. I will open this with an insight that I felt is important to share. When I visited this collection, for me, for an art historian, this was like hallowed ground. It was awe-inspiring. I was very moved, and this is an experience that more than one living sculptor today shared with me as kind of a, yeah, this really is an important collection, and it really is a space that that can change people by the fact of the collection and its history and its breadth of history and culture. Starting with Lavina Ellen Ream, Vinnie Ream, who has the distinction of being the very first female artist to receive an artwork commission for the U.S. government in 1871. And that was her commission to undertake a life-size marble statue of Abraham Lincoln. That was one of 3 statues that she contributed to the Hall collection. Her third contribution was titled Sequoia, who was a Cherokee Nation heritage subject, but really known as having been the father of the Cherokee written language. This was something that Sequoyah began in 1809, where he worked to create a new system of characters representing 86 syllables in the Cherokee language. As a quick note here, language is something that also came up in different places with the other 50 sculptors and artists I looked at. Cases like the Tuscarora, who today don't have anyone that can speak that language still living, with Heinz Goggles' statue of Chief Clinton Rickard, even though that work incorporates a name at the bottom in Tuscarora. So this was a subject that Ream became engaged with doing in the 1870s when she was still a practicing sculptor. Now, I say she was still a practicing sculptor because after she completed the Lincoln statue, things kind of took a turn for her socially. She married an Army officer and lived in Washington, D.C., and she was really a prominent socialite and member of that society. Her marriage in 1878 and followed by the birth of her son in 1883, I'll just say it derailed her sculpture career, or at least put it into a long hiatus. And so this initial interest that she had in Sequoyah as a historical figure and an important one was set aside. And it was not until about she started getting re-engaged in sculpture in about 1912 that she returned to this subject as her third commission for the National Statuary Hall collection. It was in 1913 that she was consulted with Iowa Governor and State and Senator Samuel Jordan Kirkwood in 1913 to undertake this as one of the state of Iowa's statues. Excuse me, I misspoke that. It was for Oklahoma. The state of Oklahoma approved a motion to form a committee to oversee the new statue on March 24th, 1911. And I'm gonna apologize there. I was getting her second commission confused with Senator Kirkwood for the state of Iowa. Her third statue here of Sequoyah was for the state of Oklahoma. And it marked a period where Ream was again a practicing sculptor, but unfortunately, it was also a time where she started to develop some health problems. And in the late summer of 1914, she became sick with acute uremic poisoning, which did lead to her death on November 20th, 1914. Well, this is a very unfortunate and sad development in its own right, more so because she did not live to see the completion of this pivotal work that she had created. And it was really her husband and another contemporary sculptor, George Julian Zolnay, who got together and with some of the political backing in Washington, D.C., really picked up the mantle to see that this work that was done by Ream was done to completion. And this may be this is kind of a question that some readers may have. Why is the author including Zolnay here as kind of he's not so much a co-contributor as far as the design that was done, but Zolnay does deserve some credit for having helped see this work to its completion by the Roman bronze works in February 1917. And one of his greatest unsung victories may be working with Ream's, widowed husband to fend off other sculptors. There was at least one instance where another sculptor tried to ride in and take over this project in 1916, and Zolnay fought it off, to the memory of and credit of the design that Ream had created. Well, this final statue was unveiled on June 6, 1917. As a historical kind of note, this was also the period where the U.S. was having, looking towards Europe with the ongoing World War I. Bronze as a material was going to be shortly in short supply because of the entry into the war effort with World War I. And so I think it really is an achievement that, with these other factors going on, and certainly with Ream's untimely demise, that having the statue completed and on display today is a credit to the figure and also to her work. The next sculptor is Leonard Crenell. This is an important contribution with his work Sacajawea, which is known as the guide, the Lemhi Shoshone guide, who guided Lewis and Clark on the Lewis and Clark expedition and to the Pacific Northwest. And Crenell's interesting. He came from France as an immigrant, as a boy. At age 10, his family immigrated from Lens, France in 1882. And they settled in Indiana and Illinois. Jane mentioned before that in the introduction that there are several of these sculptors who have more than one edition, and this applies to Crenell and his work here. Interestingly, the statue of Sacajawea was not done as a commission right away from National Statuary Hall and the state of North Dakota, but rather as on its own standalone right for the North Dakota State Capitol in 1910 in Bismarck. Well, Crenell's training was such that he studied art. His father was a working class man in the coal industry, which he had done in France. But really, one of Crenell's big breaks came in 1893 in Decatur, where he met Laredo Taft. And Taft was a Chicago sculptor who really was a preeminent sculptor of his time. He was a recognized authority. And at the time that Crenell and he met, Taft was getting ready for the World's Fair of 1893 in Chicago to exhibit work there. And he was looking for assistants. So at his invitation, Crenell went to Chicago and worked with Taft in an assistant capacity. Off and on and through 1902, he also helped Taft with these. Taft would go and do these public, like town halls almost, where he would do live demonstrations of modeling in clay and on a pedestal, and assisted and talk about the sculpture and modeling process as a way to really engage with audiences about sculpture as a medium. And Crenell was one of the ones that would assist him in these, besides working also in his studio in Chicago. Well, it was really also during this time that Crenell developed his own strengths as a sculptor by modeling children. He would model relatives, family members, and he got quite good at this, which really helped him with his major breakthrough commission. It was the commission to do, funded by the North Dakota Federation of Women's Clubs in 1909, along with the State Historical Society of North Dakota that year, to undertake a life-size statue of Sacajawea and her young son. Now, speaking to the level of authenticity and and background engagement of sculptors, Crunel in this case was able to meet with and have posed for him a Hidatsa woman by the name of Mink woman, Hannah Leavings Grant, who was a granddaughter of the guide, Sacajawea. And so these two photographs you see here are great. You know, the one on the left shows Crunel in his studio modeling the life-size figure, and the one on the right is a historical photo. Both of these are from the North Dakota Historical Society collections of Grant and her young son. And you can see the similarities to the sculpture and the photograph are very striking. Here we have the public dedication of the completed work in bronze on the state capitol, North Dakota State Capitol grounds in Bismarck on October 14th, 1910. And with you know, one of the interesting details of the statue was the spelling of the figure's subject's name, and this is something that has been regarded as a translation. The Sacajawea spelling as a translation of the Hidatsa word for bird woman, with the root word translated either as eagle or bird. Again, this is not a consistent usage. In fact, a different public sculpture that was the one that was done by Cooper in Portland has a different title and spelling. And this is not unique to this figure. This is something that you encounter with Native American names, phonetical spellings, different historical uses over time, and all of which are you know, they're versions of the subject. With the Sacajawea subject, this was not the only public artwork that was done around 1910. Alice Cooper, who did this wonderful statue for Portland for the Lewis and Clark Centennial. Today, this statue is actually on display in Washington Park in Oregon after it was moved at the conclusion of the Centennial Exposition. And there's a chapter that discusses this work and Cooper's history as well in the book. You know, I also, it was fascinating to read about Joe Davidson and his statue of Will Rogers that was done for National Statuary Hall. Again, this is an example of a second where a second edition of this work was done for the Will Rogers Memorial in Claremore. And you know, Joe Davidson, he spent his career modeling busts of famous individuals, historical figures, prominent socialites, and businessmen of the early 20th century. And he was also, he knew Will Rogers. The two had met prior to Rogers' untimely demise in 1935 in a plane crash. Davidson began his career with sculpture in 1906, where he studied in Paris and abroad. He did relocate from New York with his wife in 1926 to a studio he called Becheron in France. He also kept a second studio in Paris that he was utilizing. You know, Davidson is really known as a portraitist and worked primarily doing portrait heads and sculpture busts. So his full-scale statue of Will Rogers is a bit of a departure as a full statue. It was commissioned by the state of Oklahoma in 1938 as one of Oklahoma's statues for the hall. The Valsuni saying that wrong, Val-Sunai Foundry in Paris, did the casting of the first edition in bronze, which was installed in 1939. It's interesting that the second casting for the Will Rogers Memorial includes the original plaster cast of the design. And, you know, this statue raises an important, you know, idea that not all, you know, for someone to be of Native American descent or heritage, you know, it's not always readily visible in the person. And it was really a true case of inclusion here for Rogers to be acknowledged for his Cherokee Nation heritage. You know, both his parents were of mixed race Cherokee Nation ancestry, and certainly this was you know, a figure that Oklahoma wanted to include as its representative figure. And just as a comparison, that the commission for this work, Sally James Farnham in 1938, also contributed a design, but it had Rogers on horseback. So, you know, in the way that Joe Davidson chose to render the subject, you know, with a business suit, he borrowed the clothing from Rogers' widow so that he could be authentic on that score. And here we see a view of of one of his studios in France. And if you look on the right, you can see the plaster view or plaster cast version of the Will Rogers piece. Well, Dave McGarry we take a bit of a leap here with Dave McGarry. Aside from an edition that was made in 1969, which I'll get to, the Chief Washakie sculpture by Dave McGarry, done in the year 2000, really represents a huge leap ahead and kind of gap in the number of Native American figures we see in the Hall collection. And again, this was a design that was in demand. A second edition was done for the Wyoming State Capitol, with the third edition going to the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming, where, you know, the subject, there's a direct tie to the land, to the native lands of Wyoming and the Shoshone. I think one of McGarry's defining achievements as a sculptor was in how he included a wide variety of colors for his sculpture details, and to great effect. We see this in an earlier statue he did entitled "Touch the Clouds," done in 1995 for the University of Central Oklahoma. Here we see the Chief Washakie sculpture that's in National Statuary Hall collection. And I was just amazed at the level of color detail that both in different kinds of bronze patina coloration and also paints that were used and applied to the sculpture to bring out details in the headdress, in the wampum held in the left hand. This is something that McGarry was really accomplished at, and I think speaks to his upbringing in the Northern Plains and Rocky Mountains, where he had close associations with Lakota, but also his training, where at an early age he went to Italy at the age of 16 to learn bronze casting and to do this kind of level of detail with color. And it was really a subject which McGarry felt passionate about. The statue on the left, it is not in Statuary Hall, but it does depict. It's another depiction of Chief Washakie, This one in 2005 is titled Battle of Two Hearts. And this shows Chief Washaki as a younger brave astride his horse, engaged with a Crow adversary at the Battle of Crowheart Butte. Now, this is an interesting equestrian because it depicts a historical event between two tribes, one that's not fully well known, but certainly important to both the Shoshone and the Crow people, even to this day. And again, we see this level of coloration that's just fantastic in the rendering of the figure and the spear and the bonnet, even the decoration on the horse. And it's an interesting note also that that sculptors, even today, they talk to one another, they share ideas, and in discussing this work with Benjamin Victor, another sculptor who has work in the Capitol, Victor described how he had acquired a maquette of one of McCary's designs for the Battle of Two Hearts that he collected in consideration of McGarry's achievement. And McGarry did pass away in 2013, but left quite a legacy in terms of his statuary. With Benjamin Victor, I'll say this in talking with Ben and discussing his work, his influences. He was very upfront in describing how, as a young student of the arts, he read about Houdon and Taft. He studied these earlier American sculptors and their work to a level that I think reflects in his own work, which has been carried forward. And without putting too fine a point on it, I consider Benjamin Victor to be, the Laredo Taft of our era. And he is an amazing sculptor. He has been commissioned to do 4 pieces for the National Statuary Hall collections, including 2 that are Native American subjects. Sarah Winnemucca, which was his first, done in 2005, and a second work entitled Chief Standing Bearer of the Ponca Nation of Nebraska. And that one was done in 2017 in 3 editions. Well, the Sarah Winnemucca piece represents one of 2 statues representing the state of Nevada. It was a commission that coincided in the same year, 2005, as Cliff Fragua and his work on the statue of Popeye. Whether by coincidence, Victor completed his work in the spring. Fragua's piece was installed in the fall. So 2005 was kind of a banner year for the National Statuary Hall collection. Here we see the finished piece in bronze on the left, and there's a picture of Ben on the right of the dedication. At the time that Victor completed the Sarah Winnemucca statue, he was attending Northern State University in Aberdeen, South Dakota. The commission led to other important works that he undertook, including this statue of Chief Standing Bearer, cast in 2019. This is actually the 3rd edition of this design. The first was done in 2017 for the Centennial Mall at UNL campus in Lincoln, my alma mater. The 2nd edition was done in 2018 for the Ponca Nation for their lands. And it was as a result of this achievement that Victor was surprisingly honored. Well, he expressed surprise at being honored for being made an honorary member of the Ponca Nation. I'm going to jump back just for a second. The book I've written, it delves into the history of each of the subjects to a large degree, both their individual and tribal identities and histories. It was a real challenge in trying to figure out where to draw that line between the public sculpture and the history of the figure. I joked with my publisher, this could have easily turned into a 3-edition volume anthology instead of just the one book. So I did try to be as complete as possible, both in terms of the art history of each sculpture, as well as the background history of the person or the tribe that was being presented, and to what degrees that had been achieved. And that's an important thing to keep in mind here, that a lot of the success of a public sculpture depends on the viewer's interpretation. By its very nature, public sculpture is open to multiple interpretations depending on who's looking at it. And so it's kind of the checks and balances. I looked at the sculptors, each of the sculptors' influences, and so forth. I'm going to wrap up the 7 that are included with Popé. This is by Cliff Fragua. Cliff is a Jimenez heritage artist who lives in New Mexico, and has been a great advocate for his people and for conveying Popé, a Tiwa subject. Fragua is a stone carver. He's self-described as a stone carver, and really this was a commission he undertook. It began as a call in 2003, and so in talking with Cliff, he described how on his visits to the National Statuary Hall collection, one of the things that struck him was how many of the statues were of white marble. And so for his own work, this was not something he wanted to continue. He wanted some distinctive heritage reflected in the piece itself. And so for that reason, chose Tennessee marble for his stone carving. And for Gua, it's notable that he is still the first and only Native American sculptor to have contributed a sculpture to the National Statuary Hall collection. There was another piece that's in the Statuary Hall collection, Kamehameha the Great. This was a public work which I did not focus to a great extent on, by Thomas Gould, for a number of reasons. Really, the focus of my work was on North America and public works. This statue was done in several different editions, including one in 1969 for the Hall collection. So I did want to include it here in a bronze edition. This is a really great piece that I visited and had a chance to look at. I would recommend that if you would like to learn more about this, there are 2 really good resources. A book called The Painted King by Glenn Wharton, published in 2012. Wharton undertook the conservation of the first original edition of the statue in 2000. And one of the incredible findings out of that was that the first 2 editions were not bronze, they were cast in brass. So Wharton talks in good detail about that process and his findings about the provenance of the work and its later editions. And here we see there's the 3. Also, I wanted to mention a new piece of Billy on the subject of Billy Frank Jr. Frank was a vocal advocate of fishing treaty rights here in the Pacific Northwest, and undertaking this as a new edition for the Washington State contribution to the Hall collection. Haiying Wu, who is a Chinese artist, is in the process of doing that design. And I believe it's going to be also in the State Capitol building in Olympia. This is not in my book, but it certainly merits worth and consideration, as I mentioned. I would like to thank the U.S. Capitol Historical Association for hosting today's webinar, also to acknowledge For Culture and the Washington State Arts Commission for their help. Again, my apologies for the earlier technical difficulties. I hope this has been insightful, and I would be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you for your resilience as we deal with the technical challenges of life. For our folks who are on, this is your moment to put your questions in the Q&A. That's the little box at the bottom if you have a computer, or elsewhere if you have a different mechanism, has the questions. So you can ask a couple of questions. We're right at time, but maybe we can just extend for about 10 minutes. Can we do that, Fred, with you?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So for those of you who have to drop off, because I know that many of our audiences do this during their lunch hour and they really do have to go back to work. So don't take it personal, Fred, if they go back and do their day jobs. This is recorded. It will be on our YouTube channel. And so when we record it, we can take out the technical difficulties time, and we don't have to add in the vamping moments. So tell us, you've told stories about the artists, the statues, and did you find in doing this work that there was a difference between the way statues were sort of created based on where they were going to be installed? Were they different if they were going to be installed in the United States Capitol as opposed to other places? Because you had such a range of statues in your book.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jane. And to answer, yes, the National Statuary Hall collection it's a bit unique in that it is really a nexus of public statuary. Unlike, there's nothing else like it in our country, and or in Canada for that matter. And I think that is one of the great things that make it such a strong collection. You know, the breadth of time, the breadth of figures that are included. It is a unique collection in its own right. Having said that, what I found is that in every case, no matter where a statue or a carving was placed, you know, that work had its own story to tell. And I'll give you an example. In discussing with Quasala Sean Peterson, who's a member of the Puyallup tribe, Sean did a welcome figure carving that's on view in Tacoma. Well, the traditional welcome figure has the hands lifted up in greeting. It is a very much a traditional, using traditional carving methods, but in learning about its placement overlooking the bay, you know, that carving marks the spot of a Puyallup village that is no longer Indian village that is no longer there. And so there's a very definite tie to that legacy, that history of the Puyallups as a people that is continuing to this day. So there are different interpretations. There are different levels of meaning. Place certainly is one that factors into how each work is interpreted. And in some cases, it's interesting. There, like with Cornell's statue, we have that in North Dakota, and it's also in DC. In terms of it's almost like a doubling effect in terms of its meaning and visibility.
And one of our listeners has asked, did you look at all to the Statue of Freedom atop the Capitol, you know, which has a headdress that, you know, makes people think of Native Americans, although it's not really a Native American statue itself?
Yeah, that's another good question. In terms of Native American accoutrements, I that was not one that I included simply because it was not clearly an allegorical figure. There are some public statuaries that are they're non-specific. They're not of historical individuals or tribe members. They're more allegories. Glenn Curtis's statue "Be Still" is a good example of that, of a depiction of a Ojibwe representative figure as a peacekeeper between the United States and the British. Um, there are allegorical figures included, but none that are just what I'll say statues that borrow Native American visuals or accoutrements. So that was kind of a guiding.
That makes sense. Well, for our listener, just so you know, the Statue of Freedom atop the United States Capitol has an entire story that when we do our tours is told in much more detail. But let me just give you a very brief. There was quite a debate when the dome was being put together about what statue would be atop the Capitol. Of course, somebody suggested George Washington, and the general consensus at that time was maybe it shouldn't be an individual person. It should be a representation of this country, and that the most important representation of this country was freedom. And so the statue is the figure of freedom. And there was quite a debate about what was going to be on the head. The initial statue proposal was going to have a Frisian cap, which is the Roman cap that is given when slaves are, returned to freedom, when young people are, free from their families. At the time that the Capitol was being finished, was during the run up to the Civil War. And Jefferson Davis was the Secretary of War who oversaw those things. This was before the secession. And he didn't think that was the best presentation. So the sculptor came up with this new presentation with the, eagle, which does, in many, many people's mind, remind them of the Native American peoples who have been there, although it's not clear that that was the original intent, but it is there. And when you come to the Capitol, you can get more stories about that, and you can see the plaster mold of the Statue of Freedom in the Capitol Visitor Center. So you can get an opportunity to see the detail much more clearly than you can by looking up, because it's quite high in the sky. But it is there. So let's do one final question, Fred, and then we're going to thank you very much for being here. And again, thank everyone for their support and their encouragement, and encourage you to join us in the next adventures. So in doing this research, you had an opportunity in many instances to talk to the actual sculptors about what they did, how they did it. But some of the sculptures that you present, the sculptors are no longer with us. How did you conduct the research in different ways when you couldn't speak to the sculptor themselves?
That's a really great question in terms of the level of primary source research. In those cases, I went to different archives where, and like the Amon Carter Museum, different museum archives, where I could find either artist sculptor papers or biographies where they had commented about the works during their own lifetimes. Certainly, that was important to me in terms of including some accurate details as far as what was the sculptor thinking, what were the challenges at their time, and how did these commissions move forward with the sculptor's thoughts reflected. So hopefully I've done that kind of level of due diligence, and it's in terms of my own background, it was kind of a very multi-pronged approach doing site visits, visiting pieces in person, visiting repositories. That's just goes hand in hand with good archivist research and as a writer.
Great, great. Well, Fred, thank you very much. And when we send everybody the follow-up note, we will include information about how to purchase the book in case people want to, delve more deeply into this activity. And we hope that you will join us on November 21st for our next adventure in public history. Thank you again. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, Fred. Thank you to all those of you who listened.